Okay, so for this demo, it'll be slightly longer. I'm just going to be going through the whole workflow setup and some PowerShell things because I know not everyone's used PowerShell before. So right now I'm in my Redback cyber repository. This is just where I was, just double check it is there. Yep. So basically in the repository where you want to set up a workflow or pipeline, GitHub action, whatever you want to call it, you have to create an extra folder. So create a .github/workflows. As you can see, I've got 3 folders in here. These aren't required. That's just for how I wanted to sort it. But this YAML document, this has to be directly within workflows. That's what GitHub searches for configuration files for actions. So basically, whenever what it is here, the on condition, which here is a pull request, goes up, that is what triggers an action, and then that action looks for the script, the configuration file. So I'm just going to go through the whole thing. So YAML, if you haven't used it, it's basically the same as, it's like JSON, except you use indentation, sort of like Python instead of braces. So on is what you use, as I mentioned, to trigger it. And previously, I just had it firing off every pull request, but there was an issue with the built-in security to GitHub where pull request without a little target means that it doesn't let you create that event based off forked repositories because it's a security issue. But because this is happening with people that are members of Redback operations, I've changed to pull request target, which allows you to run it off forked repositories. It's quite a long explanation on their website. If you want to look at the documentation, just Google GitHub and then pull request target. So then within a workflow, you've got jobs and steps. So a single job will keep everything in one container. That's why I've kept this all as one job with multiple steps. You can pass stuff in between jobs, but that's a little harder. So if you've got a smaller workflow, I would just use steps. And this here, that's just the name, runs on. This basically tells you what type of container environment to use. So I'm using Ubuntu because that's the one that we've all been using, and I know what's installed on it better than a Windows machine. But that doesn't stop you from using PowerShell because PowerShell is cross-platform, has been for a while now. So the next part of the configuration is your env environment. Anything you declare in this global env, because it's at a level that is the same as all the steps, sorry, one above all the steps, then this can be used everywhere. That's where I include the PAT or personal access token. And I store this in GitHub secrets, which is secure, and it means you don't have to hard code your API credentials, which is something you definitely don't want to do. So now that I get to the steps, I have a step to, I have 3 steps. One step does this thing called checking out, which is a Git concept, and it basically gets all of the files from this repository and places them into this folder in the current container. So the reason I do that is because of the way that I've structured this workflow. If I go to this documentation for it and scroll down, basically the hosting repository, which is this, well, the non-forked version of this one, SecDevOps, that holds the, where is it? Sorry, the SecDevOps repository. That's where we have the data, which is a JSON file for who's going to review the pull requests and the 2 scripts that are called, the PowerShell ones. Then the only thing that actually has to be contained in the hosting repository is the workflow file and a token. So if we go back to the configuration file, that's why I check out of this repository, so that I don't have to, so that when you're setting up a workflow that someone else has made, you don't have to copy over every single file. You can just use the token and configuration file. So that's all that does, and it uses a built-in action, which GitHub gives you. It's called checkout and then version 4, its current version. So the next two basically just run scripts and then use the output to do some stuff. So run select reviewer script uses PowerShell, and basically I add a second env variable. I could include them all just up here globally, but it's neater and easier to maintain if you keep the scope narrower like you would in normal code. So here I just add the repository, which has been a while since I made these. This repo. Yep, that's why. Sorry. So the reason I just pass in the current repository is because that's how this whole workflow is working, where it's based on reviewing pull requests and the preferences list, which is in data, contains users and then the repository they want to use. So it checks to see if the current repository is contained in a certain user's one and then assigns it to them. So anyway, this is where within the YAML file you can actually run some scripts using the run command. Run some scripting without not just calling scripts. So here I create a variable, and then I also do some code. So here, the reason I have this is I want the user to move through to the next task, which is why I put it into the GitHub environment variable. This is just some PowerShell syntax. So it pipes this into the out files, sort of like echo, and then the file path and append is like using the stream operator twice instead of once with bash. So then once I have the user, sorry, that was confusing. That's why this is split up into 2 lines. Right here, that's calling a script, and this is a parameter, and that's the return value. Okay, so for the next task, it's also PowerShell, and here is the pull request information where the core logic happens. So I just get the title for the pull request because this is what I use in the task title in Azure DevOps. And the task description, key thing to note is github.event.pullRequest.url will send you the API response for the pull request. You need to add HTML URL if you actually want to link to the pull request webpage. So now I just run the second script and I pass in, here it is, env user. So this is calling the containers environment variable user, which I passed into it in the previous step. So in the next video, I'll actually go through these two just because I don't want to keep this too long. So that'll be in part 2.